On behalf of BDO South Africa, I'd like to welcome you to this presentation today on government grants. My name is David Warneke. I'm responsible for the technical side of the tax practice at BDO, and I'm joined in the presentation today by Grant Whitaker, who's a consultant with more than 11 years experience in advising a whole range of clients, from small clients, medium clients to large listed companies, on how to access the DTI incentives and grants. After Grant has given his presentation, which should be roughly about 30 to 35 minutes long, I'm going to address you on the income tax consequences of government grants in terms of the new Section 12P that's in our Act. Before Grant starts, I'd like to just point out to you that the content of the presentation does not constitute advice. You urge to consult a specialist in advising on grants or on the tax aspects of grants when considering or reporting on any actual transaction. Now I'd like to hand over to Grant Whitaker, who will speak about accessing the various government grants that are available.
Thank you, David. Hello, everybody. Just looking at the scope of this presentation today, we'll split the presentation into two parts. In part one, we'll inform the delegates about the various incentives available from the Department of Trade and Industry. We'll then explain briefly the criteria applied by the DTI for those incentives, and we'll explain how BDO can assist companies to access the incentives. In part two, David will discuss the income tax implications of the incentives. I think it's important at the outset to differentiate between loans and grants. A lot of people get confused with these two aspects. Loans are awarded upfront and have to be repaid, whereas grants are non-repayable. However, they are only paid after the investment or the project has commenced. So it's important to understand those two. The purpose of incentives. Firstly, incentives are there to support national priorities, to stimulate investment, growth and employment, as well as to support enterprise and industrial development and export promotion. The Industrial Development Incentive Administration Division at the Department of Trade and Industry is responsible for administering the grants. The vision of this division is to achieve a dynamic, industrial, globally competitive South African economy, characterized by inclusive growth and development, decent employment and equity, built on the full potential of all citizens. And their mandate is to stimulate and facilitate the development of sustainable competitive enterprises through the efficient provision of effective and accessible incentive measures that support national priorities. So who is eligible to receive a grant? Any registered South African business may apply for a grant, be it a sole proprietor, a partnership, a co-op, a trust, a CC, a Pty Limited, or even a limited company. The business must have sound financial records and be in good standing with SARS, and most industry sectors are supported by the grants, manufacturing being the most popular, as well as agro-processing, but also tourism and service businesses such as call centers, film production businesses, and other service businesses may apply for the incentives. Where to access funding? Firstly, at national government level, we have the Department of Trade and Industry, the National Department of Tourism, and the Department of Science and Technology. At provincial government level, one can access certain incentives. And then there are loan organizations. The DTI themselves have established the Small Enterprise Financing Agency. The Industrial Development Corporation has been around for many years, offering loans to businesses. And more recently, the National Empowerment Fund has been established to offer loans to South African businesses. Other sources of funding: the United Nations have offered incentives in the past to South African businesses, and other foreign funders have been known in the past to offer grants to South African businesses, specifically those businesses owned by previously disadvantaged individuals. Looking at the incentives that are available from the Department of Trade and Industry, the DTI have grouped their incentives into various clusters. The first cluster being the Broadening Participation Cluster. Under this umbrella, we have the Black Business Supplier Development Program, the BBSDP, as well as the Cooperative Incentive Scheme, and one of their newer schemes, the Incubation Support Program. Then we have the Services Investment Cluster, which administers the Business Services Processing Grant, which is available to call centers, as well as the Film and Television Production Incentive Program. The DTI also have an Infrastructure Investment Support Cluster, and under this umbrella we have the Critical Infrastructure Program and the Industrial Development Zones Incentive, or the Special Economic Zones Incentives. The DTI also have a Manufacturing Investment Cluster, which administers the Section 12I Tax Allowance Incentive, as well as the Automotive Incentive Scheme, as well as the Manufacturing Investment Program and Foreign Investment Grant, which I'll go into in more detail shortly. And then the Aquaculture Development and Enhancement Program is also administered by the Manufacturing Investment Cluster. We then have the Competitiveness Investment Cluster. Under this group, or within this group, we have the Export Marketing Investment Assistance Scheme, as well as the Capital Projects Feasibility Program, and the DTI's current flagship incentive scheme, the Manufacturing Competitiveness Enhancement Program. I'll go into more detail on that shortly. Other incentives that are available: the Industrial Development Corporation administers two incentive schemes on behalf of the DTI. Those are the Clothing and Textile Competitiveness Improvement Program and the Support Program for Industrial Innovation. The Small Enterprise Development Agency has a grant called the CEDA Technology Grant for smaller businesses. And then lastly, the Development Bank of Southern Africa has been tasked with administering the Jobs Fund. Just looking at the DTI's incentive budget for the medium term, going up to the financial year ended March 2015, it's interesting to note the Export Marketing and Investment Assistance budget, which will go up to 200 million rand in the financial year 2014 to 2015. And the Manufacturing Development Incentives, highlighted in red, the MIP, FIG, Section 12I and MCEP, that allocation will go up to 4.6 billion rand for the financial year ended March 2015. So just looking at the incentives available and the amount paid per incentive, starting with the Black Business Supply Development Program, this scheme will pay 50% of the cost of assets acquired by the business, as well as 80% of certain service projects. What's interesting about the BBSDP is that the DTI on this particular scheme will pay the supplier directly for the 50% or 20%, or rather 80% portion. This doesn't happen on the other incentive schemes, so that helps the business owner's cash flow. The Cooperative Incentive Scheme will pay 90% of the project costs. The Incubation Support Program will cover up to 60% of the setup costs. The Business Services Processing Grant, which is for call center businesses, will pay between 88,000 and 104,000 rand per new job created. The Film and Television Production Incentive Program will pay between 25% and 35% of production costs. The Critical Infrastructure Program will pay between 10% and 30% of qualifying infrastructure spend. The Section 12I Tax Allowance Incentive will cover between 35% and 55% of the cost of new assets. The Automotive Incentive Scheme will pay up to 25% of the costs of new assets acquired. The Manufacturing Investment Program will pay between 15 and 30% of the cost of new assets. And linked to the MIP, the Foreign Investment Grant will cover up to 100% of the transportation costs of bringing new assets from abroad to South Africa. The Aquaculture Development and Enhancement Program will pay between 20% and 45% of assets and services. The Export Marketing Investment Assistance has various sub-programs. One of the more popular schemes is the Exhibition Assistance Scheme, which will pay up to 45,000 Rand to a company to cover the cost of renting a stand at an exhibition overseas. This incentive scheme will also pay the economy class airfare of one representative from the company, and will also pay a day allowance of 2,000 Rand a day. The Capital Projects Feasibility Program will pay between 50% and 55% of the cost of the feasibility study. The Manufacturing Competitiveness Enhancement Program, the MCEP, currently the DTI's flagship incentive scheme, will pay between 30% and 50% of the cost of new assets acquired, and between 50 and 70% of qualifying service projects. The Clothing and Textile Competitiveness Improvement Program will pay up to 100% of the cost of assets acquired by the clothing or textile business. The Support Program for Industrial Innovation will pay between 50% and 85% of development costs. The Cedar Technology Grant will pay up to 600,000 Rand for assets acquired by the business. And the Jobs Fund will pay on a one-to-one matching basis. The Manufacturing Investment Program, the MIP, was launched in 2008 and has been a very popular incentive scheme. New or expanding manufacturing businesses may apply for the MIP. This includes wineries, fruit pack houses, and cold stores. Local or foreign-owned entities may apply for the MIP. It is calculated on the investment in machinery and equipment, as well as land and buildings and certain customized commercial vehicles. The scheme pays between 15% and 30% of qualifying investment to a maximum of 30 million Rand. The MIP grant is paid over 2 or 3 years, depending on the size of the investment, and applicants must submit their applications at least 3 months before the start of the project, meaning 3 months before a new asset is taken into commercial use. If approved for the MIP, the new manufacturing project may apply for foreign investment grant assistance. This incentive scheme compensates foreign investors for moving qualifying production assets to South Africa. The benefits of the FIG: the scheme will pay up to 100% of the cost of transporting the new machinery and equipment to South Africa. This includes the travel costs of commissioning technicians. It is limited to 15% of the actual cost of the new machinery and equipment, and limited to 10 million Rand. Key criteria for qualifying for the FIG grant: the entity must be at least 50% foreign owned, and the machinery and equipment must be new, not second-hand. Moving on to the Export Marketing Investment Assistance, the scheme has been around for a number of years and is very popular. It has 7 schemes under its umbrella. The aim of the EMIA is to partially compensate exporters, that is manufacturers as well as engineering businesses, for developing export markets or recruiting foreign direct investment. The benefits, as mentioned earlier: one representative's airfare would be reimbursed. A day allowance of 2,000 Rand per day will be paid. Up to 45,000 Rand will be paid towards exhibition stand rental. Up to 5,000 Rand will be paid for having marketing materials developed and printed or designed and manufactured. And the EMIA scheme also pays a certain amount of money towards the cost of registering foreign patents. Some key criteria for qualifying: the DTI must receive the application at least 2 months before the traveller is scheduled to travel overseas or into Africa, and the business that's applying for the EMEA grant must have been trading for at least 1 year. The Manufacturing Competitiveness Enhancement Program was launched in June 2012 and will close for applications in March 2018. The aim of the MCEP is to promote enterprise competitiveness and job retention. It is for existing manufacturers, engineering firms, and conformity assessment agencies. There are 7 components to the MCEP: the capital investment component, green technology, service projects, feasibility studies, cluster applications, and there are 2 IDC loan options available through the MCEP. The benefits of the MCEP: the DTI will pay between 30% and 50% of the cost of new assets and green technology acquired. The DTI will also pay between 50% and 70% of the cost of certain service projects, such as process improvement projects, product improvement, quality systems implementation, IT systems implementation, etc. The maximum grant one can draw down via the MCEP would be 55 million rand per component, and in theory one could draw down that amount of money for capital investment, green technology, and service projects undertaken, depending on the size of the business applying for the grant. The claims are paid within 2 months of project completion, so it's a very quick paying scheme compared to previous manufacturing incentives. The MCEP supports projects that are implemented in a 2-year period or less, and the applicant may submit a new application every 2 years. The qualifying assets under the MCEP: the purchase of new machinery and equipment and forklifts, as well as building additions and improvements to existing buildings, as well as green technology such as solar panels, lighting, heat pumps, water recycling systems, etc. The key criteria applied by the DTI when applying for the MCEP: new entities may not apply, only existing businesses. Applications must be lodged at least 60 days before commencement of the project. Only new assets will qualify, no second-hand assets. The client must spend at least 500,000 Rand or 2 million Rand for larger firms on assets in order to be eligible for the MCEP. And the business applying for the grant must have at least a level 4 BE scorecard, or be able to provide a plan indicating how the entity will achieve a level 4 or higher in the next 2 years. And lastly, the applicant's business may not reduce its labor headcount over the 2-year period that it is receiving the grant. Some interesting case studies: having been involved with incentives for over 11 years, I've seen a lot of businesses receive money from the Department of Trade and Industry, which has helped those businesses tremendously with their cash flow. There's also been some bad incidents. I can think of one in particular where a client was approved to receive the grant. The inspector from the DTI flew down from Pretoria to the factory in Cape Town. He looked at the machinery and he asked the business owner for the invoices for the machines just as a last measure before he signed off the inspection report and approved the payment of the grant. And at that point the business owner indicated that could be a problem, and after further investigation it transpired that the business owner had not physically obtained invoices from the supplier of the machines, because he managed to strike a deal whereby he gave the seller of the machines a new car that he had won recently in a lucky draw, and the two parties came to an agreement, and it was basically a swap. Therefore, the paperwork wasn't in place, and that business owner lost a great deal of money that was due to him because the DTI would not pay the grant without invoices. So it's important to have your paperwork in place and in order. And then there has been one particularly bad case, an ugly incident that we had, whereby a client was accused of submitting a fraudulent claim, not running a business according to the requirements, or not running a business at all. When the inspector arrived at the property, he ascertained that the business was not running at all, and that was contrary to what had been disclosed in the claim document submitted to the DTI. And the inspector then instructed the South African Police Service to open a case of fraud, and the commercial branch of the South African Police Service had to then question that business owner. And I'm not too sure how that ended up, but it wasn't pleasant at all. So one has to be very careful and be totally transparent and ethical with the government when applying for grants. Looking at the incentive services offered by BDO, BDO will undertake to assess the planned project for eligibility to receive an incentive, to then prepare and submit the incentive application and claim to the Department of Trade and Industry. BDO will then liaise with the DTI continually in respect of the progress of the application or the claim, and deal with any queries that the DTI may have, and basically to ensure a smooth payment of the incentive to the client. Thank you.